happened in 1946 in the Marshall Islands. And he became a weapons engineer for EG&G and wired, they called him the trigger man because he wired something like 183 nuclear weapons.
Oh, wow.
And many of my sources I spend, he's an example, 100 or more hours with to write a few pages of their story. And so I hope readers can recognize that the density of what I write about, meaning I can condense a very long amount of reporting into a few pages. And so the pages are packed with information, but they are set up by chapters before and chapters after. And some subjects feel so significant in modern national security history that they're not things I talk about glibly, in an interview. I just demand readers read it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, and that's totally fair. Area 51 to me is an interesting one. It has, obviously, it's associated with UFO lore. I know that you wrote about it directly. Can you briefly, for the listeners, describe what Area 51 was originally designed for and then when the UFO lore kind of got attached
Mhm.
to it? Because I find it to be it's an interesting confluence of military, civilian, engineering, all of that kind of coming together.
Mhm. Well, there's no doubt that, the end of World War II, how it ended, was an absolute turning point in modern American history, in humanity and also in weapons technology. And Area 51 began just a few years later. In the earliest days of the atomic age, Area 51 is a classified military base inside of a classified nuclear testing range called the Nevada Test Site. The name has changed. I still call it the Nevada Test Site. Inside a classified facility called the the Nevada Test and Training Range. It's a massive piece of land, and it was the perfect place for the CIA to set up a base to build spy planes that could spy on the Soviet Union from overhead, very specifically to figure out what the Soviets were up to and whether they were going to start nuclear World War III. And I write the origin story from the people who were there. That is what is so remarkable about Area 51, with all this time having passed. And I am like just the privileged reporter that got access to it. And I'm so glad I did. And I'm so glad all those men told me their stories before they died. And I put it in the book. But you are absolutely right that it's kind of the nexus of this modern way of war, which spilled out from there. And all of my books follow that through line. The Operation Paperclip, in which I write about the Nazi scientists who came here after the war to
Yep.
build our weapon systems so we could make sure we outperformed the Soviets. The DARPA book I wrote called The Pentagon's Brain. DARPA is the most secret science agency in the military that, almost nobody knows about. It was built, it came immediately out of this need to create vast weapon systems of the future. As we were doing it, the Soviets were doing it too. And so and then you have the CIA's paramilitary operations trying to figure out what's happening on the ground with the small wars. And so my experience as a reporter over the past 20 years and working on all these books has been weaving together the different military and intelligence community operations that make the fabric of the modern world.
Given we're talking 1960s at this location, we're talking things like SR 71,
Mhm.
the U-2 spy plane. Both of those designs, by the way, they still hold water. Those aircraft are unbelievable.
Mhm.
SR-71 not flying anymore, U-2, and then there's Lockheed A-12, super high altitude planes, Mach speeds. This is 60s technologies.
Yep. And for reader or listeners who don't know, we'll just say if they saw the X-Men movies, the
Yeah.
plane those superheroes fly is essentially the SR-71,
Yep.
which we know now was actually the Air Force unclassified version of the super secret CIA plane that was the originator of that, called the A-12 Oxcart, which was a one-seater, and the pilots of whom I interviewed for the Area 51 book.
Unbelievable.